kids. And now he was allowed to fetch a lotion from his mother's lab. It felt good, being big. "In the rack by the door," Mum said with a little smile. He'd been inside the lab before, of course. As a baby, after they'd come here to London from Africa, he'd practically lived in there. While Mum worked, mixing and smelling and flicking between her burners and her computer screen, he would paddle about the place in a sort of pair of knickers, hung on a wheeled frame. He could scoot and whiz, and once disappeared completely under a table, so Mum couldn't find him. He'd loved his knickers on wheels. He loved the lab, too. Because it was in a separate shed in the backyard, it had always seemed like a different world. Pushing open the door now, he got a waft of the smell of it. Somewhere between a cake baking, old books, the sweet, strong incense, and underneath it all, the hard, cold smell of science. It looked like it smelt. The walls were old and panelled with well-polished dark wood. The benches to the left were gleaming steel with glass cupboards, VDU screens, and instruments of the most precise and modern specifications, while to the left a huge old wooden table stood empty but for a massive globe beneath a rack of hanging dried herbs. Along the back wall was stacked shelf upon shelf upon shelf of books, ancient leather-bound tomes, colourful paperbacks, smart-looking hardbacks, parchments laid out flat, and scrolls rolled tight and piled carefully, plus CD-ROMs and DVDs, chrome-coloured discs full of information, and old, thick black vinyl discs, which played on a machine with a huge curling horn. It seemed to Charlie that all the knowledge in the world, past and present, lived in his mother's laboratory, and if it didn't, you could find out here where it did live. By the door was a tall, flattish wooden rack, made up of rows of shelves. On each shelf was a row of small, shiny, coloured glass bottles, held in place by a little wooden bar along the front. If you looked carefully, you could see that the colour was not in the glass, but in the contents of the bottle, and they were arranged in order of colour like a rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Charlie craned up to where the reds began in the top left-hand corner, and scanned along the shelves looking for 27 red. There it was, a deep crimson, blood-coloured, only not so thick-looking. He reached up for it, and giving the lab a last yearning look, took it back to where his mother was waiting in the kitchen. "Thank you, sweetie," she said, and was just about to lift the lid and drip a drop of the lotion onto her still-bleeding wound when she hesitated. "Bring me a pen and paper," she said suddenly. Charlie fetched one of the strong, swirling glass pens that they used for every day, and the green kitchen ink, and a scrap of envelope. "Proper paper," she said, and he brought a piece of heavy, clean parchment from the drawer. Mum pulled herself up, and as she did so, the movement made the blood bubble a little more from her shin. She took no notice. Instead, she lifted her leg and laid it along the kitchen table, as if she were doing her yoga or ballet. The parchment lay on the kitchen table. The ink was ignored. Mum took the Venetian pen and cautiously dipped it in the beading blood of her wound. Charlie stared. "Don't worry," she said to him. "I just thought of something I've been meaning to do for a while." He still stared. Mum started to write. By dipping the sharp little nib in her deepest cut, she had enough blood to write a full, elegant paragraph and a signature. "What is it?" he asked, feeling a little ill. "You'll know soon enough," she said. She flapped the parchment gently and watched the scarlet turn to a delicate brown. It looked like a magical text, an ancient spell, a decree by some all-powerful and long-dead king or queen. "I'm putting it up here," she said, as she rolled it up, tied it quickly, and popped it behind the photo of her and Aniba on honeymoon in Venice, on the top shelf of the dresser. "And Charlie—" Here she stopped and looked at him, her blue eyes sure and clear. "If you need to go anywhere, take it with you." A sudden, sharp sense of importance welled up inside him. She didn't mean take it to the bathroom, or take it when you go to bed. She meant something bigger, more grown-up, more important. Sometimes Charlie felt that the grown-ups around him existed on that other level, talking of things they didn't mention to him, minding things, dealing with things that were not to do with children. Until recently, he'd ignored it and carried on reading his book or taking extra biscuits while they weren't paying attention. But lately there'd been a lot of talking downstairs after he had gone to bed, a lot of hushed telephone calls and furrowed brows. This look in his mother's eyes, this sudden mysterious writing in blood, were to do with the same things, he was sure. Just then the great noise that heralded the return of Dad started up. There was a Ghanaian song about dinner, delicious mamuna, with spicy dawn, that he sang to himself whenever he wasn't doing anything else. Tuwe, tuwe, mamuna, tuwe, tuwe. You could hear it from the distance as he strolled up the street. And the firm, solid tread of his feet crossing the yard, and the jangle of his big bunch of keys, because once again he hasn't noticed that the door is unlocked. 3, 2, 1, Charlie counted down in his head, and his timing was perfect. On, blast off, came Dad's huge voice calling out, "Hello! Hello! Where's my family?" Charlie's dad, you ought to know, was huge. Not just a big man, but huge. He wasn't technically a giant, but Charlie thought he might have giant blood, and this worried him sometimes, because if his dad had giant blood, then so did he, and that made the whole thing of, "You're a big boy now, growing nice and big like your dad," a different ballgame. Charlie was proud and happy to be brown, both black like his dad and white like his mum, he said, but he wasn't sure he wanted to be giant as well. Once in a museum, Charlie had seen some armor from ancient Greek times, a breastplate made in the shape of a man's body, with all the muscles and even the belly button molded in beaten bronze. That's what Charlie's dad looked like with his shirt off. Like he was still wearing armor. He had huge arms, and the veins on them looked like rivers on a map, only they stood out. He had huge legs, and shoulders as wide as a small shed, and a neck like a tree, and he walked straight and tall and smiling, and everyone got out of his way and turned to look at him after he had passed. When he closed down the smile in his eyes and let his mouth lie stern, he was the most frightening-looking man. Then when his smile burst through and his white teeth shone and his eyes crinkled up and his cheeks went into little apple shapes, he was like the god of happiness. "We're in the kitchen," called Mum. "She's broken," called Charlie. "No, I'm not," said Mum, finally dripping the blood-stopper lotion onto her cuts. And the evening descended into a sweet time of Mum lying around telling jokes, Dad cooking dinner, Charlie watching The Simpsons, and staying up late, because there's no lessons on a Sunday. He forgot all about the parchment written in blood, and didn't think of it again until 6 months later, when he came home to find that his parents had disappeared. Chapter 2. He'd been at his lessons with Brother Jerome. Arabic, Latin, mathematics, music, and the history of human flight, and his head was aching from the amount of studying he had done. Mum said he learned more being on his own with a tutor, and no doubt it was true. But sometimes he just wanted to lark about a bit in lessons, like he'd read about in stories. And how could you do that on your own? So after his lessons on that day, he headed down to the fountain to play a bit of football with the school kids. Steve Ubsworth might be there, or Lolo and Jake, or Bex and Joe Lockhart. None of them was around, but Raffy Sadler was. He was leaning against the tree and calling younger boys to him with a flick of his head and whispering to them. Raffy certainly wasn't a school kid, and he was too old to be called a boy, but he wasn't really an adult either. Everybody knew Raffy. He was tall and handsome, with sleek, shaved black hair, and he gazed at you from big brown eyes with the thickest lashes, almost girly lashes, but no one would say that. He wore a long leather jacket and a funny little light beard, shaved into shape. He wasn't really old enough to have a beard, and it wasn't a very good one. He always had money, and adults sometimes wondered where it came from. Today, Raffi deigned to join in the football for a minute or two, kicking around a little. People let him through and didn't tackle him, and not just because he was strong. Soon he went back to leaning and talking on his mobile. Part of Charlie longed for Raffi to call him over, but Raffi had never taken much notice of Charlie. The football had made them hot, so they all got some cherry sherbet off the guy with his white wooden trolley piled high with crimson cherries and jugs of sugar-cane syrup, and drank it frothy and cool from his tall glasses. One of Raffi's boys took him a glass, but he didn't touch it. Instead, he strolled over to where Charlie was. "Nice haircut," he said. Charlie's mum had shaved his head the day before. This time, she'd cut in a design of 2 crocodiles with one belly. Each has a head and a tail and 4 legs, but they are set like an X, and the center of the X is their shared belly. It was an Adinkra symbol from Ghana. It was about how, though we all eat with different mouths, we have only one belly between us. "Thanks," said Charlie, surprised. Raffi never talked to him. Charlie's parents used to know his mum, Martha, and Charlie knew that Raffi lived alone with her and had left school years ago and been in trouble. And he knew that Raffi was not the kind of guy who would talk to him. That's all he knew. Charlie couldn't think of anything else more interesting to say. He smiled again, and then kind of nodded. Then Raffi had strolled away again, and Charlie was so embarrassed that he went home. The sun was heading west, and as he got back towards his street, he could smell the evening river smell rising up, cool and damp, to meet the evening cooking smell of wood smoke and garlic. The flowers hung heavy on the trees in the front gardens as he turned into his street. He was wondering what was for supper, and hoping there would be some cherries left over from breakfast. He'd be sorry when the cherry glut was over, but soon the gardens would be full of strawberries, so there was that to look forward to. And who knows, maybe a ship full of fruit would come up from the south. As he approached his house, he was fantasizing about the old days, when you could get all different kinds of fruit at all different times of year, coming in aeroplanes from far, far away. Ah, well, cherries would do for now. When he got to his front garden, the front door was closed. There were no lights on, and there was no good smell seeping out. He banged on the door. Nothing. He peered through the window. He couldn't make out much in the dim light, but he could see there was no movement, no sign of life. Charlie went round to the back. Back door shut. No lights. He banged on that door. Nothing. Turning to the wall to see if there were any cats about who he could ask if they'd seen anyone, he saw something which clutched his heart. The door of his mother's lab was open. Not just unlocked. Open. He stared at it for a moment. Then he went over and peered in. If there is anyone in there who shouldn't be, they would have closed the door to hide themselves, he reasoned. Therefore, no one is in there who shouldn't be. Therefore, maybe someone is in there who should be. That is, Mum. So he looked in. Nobody. Everything was just as it should be, except that it was open and empty, which it really, really shouldn't be. Stepping back into the yard, Charlie closed the door carefully and quietly behind him. At least it looked right now. As right as an empty, dark, locked-up house can look when you've come in for your parents and your supper. He felt a strong, twining, furry thing around his ankle and looked down. It was one of the skinny, tough, big-eared cats from the ruins. He bent down to talk to her, because you don't pick those cats up. Cuddly, they're not. "Hey, Petra," he said.
"She's gone,"
said the cat in her scowly voice. "Gone where?" said Charlie immediately.
"Dunno,"
she said, her yellow eyes large in the dimming light.
Gone off by river.